Welcome back to the CRE with CBC Worldwide podcast. I'm your host, Dan Spiegel, Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Coldwell Banker Commercial. And today we are going to explore a super interesting topic. But on this podcast in general, we explore trends, ideas, and innovations shaping the future of commercial real estate. We're going to dive into today something that's really transforming how buildings are imagined, built, and operated: construction technology. Right? It's amazing. From AI-driven design to robotics on job sites, the tools are shaping and reshaping the construction industry and this construction of commercial real estate and redefining what's possible in the industry. Joining me today is someone who's been tracking these shifts closely, Dan Weisman, Director of Strategy and Innovation for the National Association of Realtors. Dan brings a unique perspective at this intersection of real estate, technology, and strategy, and I'm thrilled, Dan, to have you on the show today. We're going to talk about what's real, what's hype in construction tech, and how it's impacting developers and brokers, and what commercial real estate professionals really have to think about as they watch these trends in the year ahead. So whether you're a broker, an investor, a developer, anybody just curious about the trends that are going on in construction and technology and commercial real estate, that's today's conversation, and let's get to it. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me. Nice to be part of this.
We will try to keep it clear here because there are two Dans in this conversation, but I think there's two different voices, so I think we'll keep it okay. But let's start our conversation, Dan, with learning a little bit more about yourself, your background, your professional journey, your connection to commercial real estate, and maybe what piqued your interest in construction technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for having me. Awesome to have this conversation. It seems like construction tech is really starting to take off, and we'll talk through a bit about why I think that and kind of where I think there's some opportunities. So my background, I started my career actually in commercial construction. So went to school for civil engineering, and then started as a project manager building buildings like you see behind me, and all across many cities in the Midwest. And so I've always had this passion and to build things. And one of the last larger general contractors I was working with, like many businesses, and especially in the contracting world, everybody did things differently. And there was a point where we realized that we were growing at such a rapid pace that we couldn't keep doing things that way. Because there was too many risks associated with it. And so we implemented a big ERP system, an enterprise resource planning system. And at the time, since I could build buildings, I said, oh, of course I can implement software. That's so easy. I just built this building over here. I quickly learned that that was not the case, but it was my stepping stone into really becoming passionate about people, process, and technology and kind of pulling those things together. So commercial construction to implementing software, and then moved down to Chicagoland area and started a small consulting group with a few other people to continue to do what I loved, which was helping people improve how they operate their businesses. And there was almost always a software component to that. And then about 6 years ago, I joined the National Association of Realtors as part of their strategy and innovation team. And our team's role and what I've been focusing on are a couple things. One is researching tech, so understanding what technology is out there. So all the buzzwords: AI, crypto, blockchain, augmented reality, virtual reality, robotics. Like, what do these things mean, and how will they impact the real estate space? And so our team does research, we build relationships, and ultimately building a community so that the real estate industry can understand what they should be paying attention to. So that's really the main focus now.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it sounds like you are uniquely qualified to speak of this, given your hands-on experience and your education in civil engineering. Much more than I, that's been really focused on the brokerage and services side of the business. But there's a lot that goes into commercial real estate. From the brokerage just focuses on getting the deal done, and after that, there is a whole slew of things that happen. And technology, I'm sure, has not only been a part of that, but also is an increasingly part of how to make that process more efficient and effective and speedier and all those kind of things. So why don't we start with that, Dan, if you would? Why don't you tell us just The current wave of construction tech, and I don't know if there's a short acronym for this or not, they're construction tech, but you can share with us if there is. But of that current wave, what really excites you most about what is either emerging or has already been implemented or is just maybe on the horizon 2 or 3 years out? What's that one or two things that you think is really going to be changing the way that commercial developers build buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of set the stage. So what I find interesting is over the years, and you know this, we've talked about prop tech, we've talked about construction tech, we've talked about fintech, we've like kind of separated everything. And I feel like we're at this moment where it all blends together. And a number of those things have to do with obviously changes in how commercial properties are being used. We have a housing shortage. So, like all of these technologies that we used to kind of separate, I feel like are all merging together. And that's where this construction technology component comes in. And if you're not familiar, like generally with the construction industry, um, last year, there was $13 trillion of activity related to construction, and McKinsey's predicting that it's going to hit over 16 trillion this year. So this isn't a small market; it is huge, as you know, being in the commercial space. Um, the challenge is that it's second to last in digitization. So just not very open to change, right? And so that is a challenge and an opportunity. The other, guess what number one is, Dan? Can you guess?
I would guess it's the brokerage services business, but that's going to be my guess.
Agriculture.
Agriculture, okay.
So it was like agriculture, construction, healthcare was in the top five, which surprised me a little
Yep.
bit. But anyway, and so when you have this huge industry with lots of money, slow to adopt digitization and technology, and then on top of it, a lot of what we do in the construction industry and the real estate industry is very manual, and productivity is everything and everything we do. So construction has had 1% productivity growth compared to the rest of industries, which is 2.8%. And then to top it all off, and kind of this is like doom and gloom a little bit, but to top it all off, we're going to have this labor shortage because we haven't seen as much of an influx of tradespeople entering the space. And so we've got a ton of money being spent. We have uh, lack of innovation, low productivity. And so, again, this isn't doom and gloom. This means there's opportunity to make this better. And what we've seen over the past about 10 years um, is significant money being put into construction technology in particular, about $50 billion of it into tech. And so you start to see this dynamic of we need buildings, we need properties, we need homes. We've been challenged to keep up at a rate that we need to, and again, I mentioned it in my opening, but like people, process, technology, we've got the people component for the most part. We've got the process, but we've been missing this technology to tie it all together. And that's where I think there's this huge opportunity and why there's this, as you asked about like this wave of construction technology that's starting to bubble to the top because we're realizing that like there's not much else we can do. And so, how do we use technology to help support the dynamics of our economy and the way just expectations are changing in the real estate space?
Yeah, I think you hit on something that I was just thinking about as you started to talk about some of the factors driving this. But listen, the development industry or development business for commercial real estate or residential for that matter is facing some significant challenges. Cost of labor, availability of labor, one, cost of materials, another one, right? Ever since the pandemic, the cost and the supply chain issues have driven up the cost of materials to construct. And then there's the financial construction cost, right? In other words, the interest rates that are paid by developers for short-term construction loans, all those things are putting a squeeze on the bottom line of projects. And what I'm thinking as you talk is like, wow, technology may not solve those problems, but finding other efficiencies in the construction business can help mitigate the degradation of profit on a building, right? Is that make
Well,
sense?
yeah, absolutely. And so at the same time of all these challenges that you just said, everybody wants things done quicker and
Right.
better
Sure.
for less money, and that's just not the reality of where we are. I You brought up materials, and I feel like that's one of the biggest opportunities in the construction tech space is around procurement. And, um, that's one area that we're heavily focused on is better understanding, like, 1, there's way longer lead times now because of the supply chain ripples from the pandemic, and so that is usually one of the biggest challenges on completing a project and also costing time is money, costing, construction site money, and so, that's definitely an area of high interest, um, is procurement.
Yeah, I didn't think of that as being a place to improve, with technology, but does make sense because it's not just the availability, but it's the, getting it at the right price and getting it delivered on time, finding alternative, providers of materials and so forth, all super important, elements of building.
Yeah, and it's the timing of it too, like, you live in the city, and, like, there's not a lot of space to set up and store pieces of equipment and materials, and so, like, you have to have, like, the right timing to sequence a project to minimize additional labor for moving things from site A to site B, from, just the overall schedule and productivity. It's so critical. So, actually, yeah, supply chain procurement has become a huge topic in that space now.
Right, and if any of the listeners aren't really familiar with that, just think about this. If you remodeled a kitchen or a basement or whatever at a house, right? And something's not available, well, what does your contractor want to do? He wants to put that workforce, so to speak, on another project, right? Because he doesn't want them sitting idle waiting for cabinets to arrive. And then what does that do? Well, then the cabinets arrive and now the people are busy somewhere else. Just multiply that by the scale of like the building behind you, what 800,000 square foot building or whatever, and it's a major cost issue. So that's super, super interesting. Dan, why don't you touch on a little bit of the technologies that are, coming into the construction tech space, like AI or robotics or, just anything else that what are the ones that are starting to influence the construction tech space the most?
Um, so of course AI is like huge and it ties into what we were just talking about. Like you think about supply chain and procurement, um, data is behind everything we do, right? And so how do you make sense of that data? Years ago, we've struggled with making sense of data. And now, because of AI and the availability of it to kind of the general public, so to speak, we're able to do so much more in a faster, more efficient way. Um, there are some companies I neglected to mention when you asked me to tell a little bit about myself. I also work closely. We have a venture arm, NAR does, Second Century Ventures, and an accelerator program within it called Reach. And so we have a number of like startups in the commercial space as well as we're starting to get into the construction tech space that I think are very applicable to this conversation around utilizing AI. So there's a company that is actually called Paraffin, and they work with large um, hotel developers. And if you've ever worked with the pro forma associated with building one of those hotels, they have their specs, but then they have a certain piece of property they can work with. There's height restrictions. There's all these, things that you have to work through. Well, what Paraffin does, and they've been doing this before AI was popular, is essentially taking that performa and the specs from, say, a Hilton hotel, plugging into their AI platform, and it's giving within minutes 10 to 20 variations of how you could build that hotel that meets all the requirements, whether it's zoning and things like that. And so that's a powerful example of AI. And it also, I think, goes back to the idea that like AI has been around for 70 plus years. It didn't just happen overnight. Um, but I think you start to look at opportunities like that from a design perspective. Um, and then even like using, I mentioned data, like we have so much rich data. I have just in my house, I have Ring cameras and doorbells and Alexas. And like, think about all that data that's just happening in my little bubble of my house and what you could potentially learn off around like me and my family and how we interact and provide value down the chain. And so, like in the commercial space, for example, there are companies that are now, most construction sites have some sort of cameras located. And so they can now take that data and better understand one, the work that's put in place. So that ties into schedules and costs and productivity. It can help with safety. So it can like detect if somebody fell. And so we're starting to see AI used in some really innovative ways that at the end of the day will help support the commercial construction space in general when it comes to even remodels and developments across the board. Uh, AI is obviously a huge opportunity to do things like that.
It's important, that we talk about AI at some point, Dan, because it's being used in all different parts of industry, both commercial real estate and all industries, right? But how it impacts, in particular, the construction industry is something I wouldn't know about. So it's super interesting to hear. Certainly know those cameras are at construction sites. It's super cool to look at buildings go up and see what happens, in time lapse videos and things like that. But there's also a very practical, real use of what's out there in terms of AI and technology in construction.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I actually, as I sit here on Michigan Ave, when I was in school in college, I went to University of Wisconsin Madison, and uh, I started out just doing a general business degree, and I actually walked down Michigan Ave, and to your point, saw construction going on, and that was kind of like where I was like, I've got to get into this business. This is amazing, and unfortunately, the way that it's being done from, well, I'm gonna date myself a little bit, 25 years ago is kinda still the same. And so again, it ties back to those numbers we talked about. There's huge opportunity, and AI is one of those, I think, pivotal points where people are realizing, like, we have all this data, we now can do something with it, and it's not overly complicated, and it's gonna help support developments, management of projects, and ultimately more real estate.
Yeah, I mean, project management alone, I can see it could be a tremendous, value add, using insights instead of just the mind of the project manager and the experience of the project manager, but actually aggregating experiences from across companies, markets, property types, all that sort of thing would be super neat. Any other types? Let's get just be since you focused on AI, but any other types of technology, maybe robotics or anything else that you see as really emerging as an integral part of construction tech space today?
Yeah, I think robotics is an interesting one. You think about when I was in the commercial construction space, actually building, we were doing prefab. So we had a big shop and we could prefab wall panels and install things and then bring them out and set them in place. So that helped from an efficiency perspective. Now we're getting to a point where those walls that we had people building in the shop can be done by a robot to some degree. Um, there's multiple challenges with that. I mean, one, the cost associated with robots. Although I talked to a startup recently, they actually buy their robots most of the time from car manufacturers because building a 2 by 4 wall, for example, doesn't need to be as precise as building a BMW. And so at some point, a BMW's robotics, for example, no longer serve within whatever that variance is. And so you bring it over and have somebody start to build walls with it. But there's a lot of overhead associated with robotics. And it becomes challenging because you can't just like pick that up and like move it to the next place very easily, especially if you're doing work across the country. Um, but there are some other use cases, and this isn't just related to like new construction, but it's also existing buildings. There's a company I spoke with recently that has built a little robot that will go across a roof platform, and take images and understand the dynamics of that roof. I'm sure many people are aware, like roofing is the biggest pain in the butt in terms of leaks and causes so many issues, insurance, all those things. And so this robot you put up on a roof, it'll literally scan your entire roof. It will understand the thermal dynamics associated with the roof and where there are low spots and where there's sitting water. And it gives you this reading and image so that you can better address any potential roof issues that you don't even know about in the future. And so you think about something like that from a robotics perspective, that is much easier than moving a big robotic arm, of course, that builds walls. It's small, it's, I forget, 2 by 2. Um, but it also helps from a safety perspective. You don't have to send 5 people up on a roof to do an inspection. You can send a robot around. So there's some cool stuff happening. And then also robotics with like layout of properties as well. Whether you're remodeling and building like behind me or a new building is helping with the layout to because that's usually in the construction space. That's where you lose a lot of money. You make a few mistakes of layout. Somebody puts the wall in the wrong place, a pipe in the wrong place. The next thing you know, you're ripping everything out. Robotics can be used there too. So that's another area. Um, the one thing I'm pretty excited about, and this has been talked about for a long time, but this concept of digital twins. Um, and if you're not familiar with that, essentially, it's a copy of what your building or your property is. Um, and tying it back to AI and the amount of, like I mentioned, Ring cameras and doorbells, the amount of information and data we're getting out of our buildings is, I think, very critical, especially in the challenges we've had with filling buildings, to better understand your tenants, what they're doing, where they are, when you can shut lights off, when you can turn the air up or down. And so I think when you can try to like think about a pilot. So you're doing pilot training. I'm not a pilot, so I don't know much about this, but I do know that they have simulators, right? You don't just train a pilot and say, "Hey, go fly a 747. We hope it goes well." You go on a simulator. Think about a digital twin as like a simulator, so you can understand what's happening within your property. And so I think digital twins now again, everything kind of ties back to AI. I think there's real opportunity there to create significant efficiencies on existing properties in particular.
Yeah, you brought up a good point there, because building or construction tech sort of bleeds into building tech, right? Which also, also has an impact on sustainability, right? The fact that you can just cool the parts of the building being used, or and also just uptime, right? So you can monitor the HVAC system and see when a certain part is starting to wear down, and start to focus on, and making sure you plan for capital spend doing, to fix something or something like that. There's definitely some bleed over between construction tech as the buildings become operational and moves into building tech. So interesting. Let me just we talked about all of what's possible. So Dan, why don't you comment for a moment, other than just momentum, I guess. What are the current, I guess, barriers to adoption? Or is like the beginning of our conversation, are the factors that are driving costs up just so great that builders are running to these techs, or are there things that are sort of standing in the way today to developers and builders sort of implementing some of these new tech?
Yeah. It's us, it's people, it's humans not liking change. We're probably one of the biggest barriers. And that's not just the construction industry. I mean, that's across every industry, right? Um, but then when you take real estate and the construction industries, which are so old and there's a lot of like historic knowledge and people in those industries that we don't like change. And so I think people and just change management in general is always hard. When I mentioned I implemented my first ERP system, uh, I was people didn't like me that much. They thought like, what is this guy doing? He's turning my life upside down. Like the field people, we had, I don't know, 800 field employees. They had to start entering time electronically. These were carpenters, laborers, people that like literally are using a pencil to scratch down their hours on a 2x4, and then they bring it back to the job site and they enter it in a spreadsheet or something. So people and change management is always hard. I think one of the biggest things also is just education. Um, one around uh, the value in what technology can do. A lot of people get scared of technology because they think it's going to eliminate their job. And when this was again 15 plus years ago, when I was implementing my first ERP system, the goal wasn't to lay people off or eliminate jobs. The goal was to allow people to be better at what they did and stop wasting time with data manual entry type stuff. And so I think we need to look at it in a positive, opportunistic fashion where like we're trying to implement software to help you. And that's the thing is we've got to convince people like it's always what's in it for me, right? And so we have to figure out ways to better educate people so they see the bigger picture and don't have the blinders on and see you mentioned like sustainability. Like, don't just think about like, oh, I want to do something with my HVAC unit today because it's going to save me $5. It's also an impact to the environment. It's impact to your tenants. There's multiple facets to that. And so I think education around understanding why technology and integrating that into your building, into your construction process is so important. I think that's really critical.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the human factor being the limiting factor. But I think to your point, your example of like time, labor entering a time card, electronically. The thing is, as the world has changed and we do so much of our lives on phones, right? I'm sure that I would guess today that same labor had no problem doing it, right? Because it's just whatever, everyone's carrying a phone in their pocket. So now it's not an issue. And I think maybe the same goes for some of the AI or other construction tech as all of us get used to reading search results with the AI filter on or using it to write better emails or letters or proposals or whatever we may be doing, people start it'll start being integrated to our day-to-day life and business and personal life. And hence it'll be easier to adopt. You know what I mean? It starts to change people's behavior because we just get used to doing it, even though it seems rough at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree. Like, I honestly don't even use Google anymore. I go straight to ChatGPT and ask it questions.
Interesting.
And yeah, so that was, I mean, you think about everybody Googles in the world. I think that dynamic's gonna shift. And so it's an example of like how, just to your point, like these dynamics within our lives, within work,
Exactly.
within technology, it all evolves. And so uh, you got to be proactive in what you're doing when it comes to understanding where there are benefits. One of the other challenges, real quick, Dan, is that there's we went through this period of time over the past maybe 3 or 4 years where money was almost free and there was a lot of investment in startups, and it was very overwhelming. Especially,
Sure.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I do this every day for 8 plus hours. Like, this is what I do, is research and learn about tech, and it was overwhelming for me. So I would imagine the average person who's not focusing on tech, they're just like, where do I begin? The good news, good and bad news, the good news is that's slowing down a little bit. The bad news is some of these startups are going away. But I think at the end of the day, I'm hoping that things level out a bit and there's a little there's an ability to focus more on like, what's the problem and how are we going to solve it? And is there a technology that can help us do that? Because we've kind of flipped in the past handful of years, we've flipped things and everybody's looking for a technology. And at the end of the day, it's like, do you even know why you want this technology? Like, why do you think you need this? And so I'm hoping we're at a point where we can start to focus on like, how are we better at what we do? How do we create efficiencies? How do we provide a better tenant experience? And oh, by the way, is there technology that can help me do that?
Yeah, interesting. Let me I'm gonna go a little deeper on something you just said, tenant experience and tenant build out in general. I mean, that's a sub how do I call it? A sub portion of building tech, right? One of the things that tenants and commercial real estate professionals struggle with, and the tenants certainly do, is occupancy. Like, what is that date slipping, right? In the retail space, it's super important. Listen, if your retail store opens October 1 or December 19th, could be make or break for you, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a type of it's contingent on tenant build out, which is essentially construction or finishes, right? Same with office space. Less so maybe with industrial, just because it tends to not be as sophisticated in terms of build out, but office space for sure. You have to date to move. You got to line the plan. And you need to get the permit and certificate of occupancy. Is any of the tech helping, or is that just simply project management tech that is helping perhaps the build out process in commercial real estate?
Yeah, there are some. I mean, at the end of the day, it relies a lot on the project management and understanding whatever city or town you're working in. But there are some um technologies out there that are trying to help facilitate that in terms of understanding zoning, the permitting process, um, being able to kind of move documents through that workflow. There are some out there just to try to make it easier because, yeah, one of the challenges is like just getting a project started can take months and months and months. And then you have to build it and then you have the construction stuff. So, yes, there are some technologies out there that are kind of looking at what I would consider that like pre-construction, pre-design phase of a build out or a new building.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I just think as you spoke, so much of the timing has an impact on the bottom line, right? Because you got to order materials, you got to pay for materials. You don't want those materials sitting in a warehouse waiting 2 months for a permit, right? It's no
Yeah.
different at a house than it is in a high rise building. So there's a lot of things I think that technology can help, even if it's just project management tech, can really help improve the process. And it's all a sub part, as I said earlier, of the construction tech, right? It's all a sub part of that thing from the ground up development and then within the spaces themselves. So interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So one of the I told you we're starting to get ourselves into construction
Sure.
tech within our accelerator program. And one of the companies, which at first you may think like, why would you have they're not construction like? It's a company called Packsmith, and they're working with small businesses to essentially allow people to package goods from their homes and ship them out. And so the idea and the construction spin is like, think about like a lighting distributor. Or let's think about if you order some shoes from Nike, that doesn't always come from the Nike warehouse. That comes from a local store sometimes. Well, the person packing that in the Nike store is not trained on how to package uh, a pair of shoes and whether to use UPS or FedEx or whatever, and it costs them significantly more. And so this company that we just joined our Reach commercial program is called Packsmith is helping to facilitate to create efficiencies when it comes to small businesses in packaging, putting products together and shipping them. And also our play here is around construction. And you mentioned like cabinets, although maybe that's not the best example, but faucets and light fixtures and all those things. You look at a big company like Ferguson, which if you're not familiar, huge
Sure.
plumbing,
Yeah.
supplier type person, they have warehouses all over. And so you order something from them. They have, I think it's build.com, I think is theirs, which is
Right.
like for a consumer, right? Like that stuff ships from all different warehouses and it's not necessarily efficient and it's not packed right. And so anyway, I just thought it was interesting because we're talking about supply chain and procurement, and there's lots of opportunities to help support, minimize the distance it has to travel, and help make sure that it gets to where it needs to get on time.
Well, let me also just give a shout out to you guys at NAR, but having that reach program and the accelerator and so forth is we appreciate it as part of the industry. I know my team at Coldwell Banker Commercial love looking at new tech and just seeing what's out there is in our brokerage services space, as well as just being more knowledgeable at things like construction tech that impacts commercial real estate. So I appreciate
Absolutely.
your extended team for all they do to support kind of innovation in our broader commercial real estate industry. Before we wrap up, let me just ask you anything you want to point out in terms of the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years that we should be on the lookout for on the radar for that really could be game changing in construction tech. Anything you want to highlight for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think just generally, again, like I mentioned it probably a few times, but really focus on don't worry about the technology. Focus on what you think you can do better and then figure out how to do it. So don't push things into your world uh, if they're not going to help you just to say you use AI or just to say you have a digital twin of a building. Really figure out where like your pain points are and your bottlenecks are and try to find a technology that will work for you. So again, I mean, obviously, I think AI is the hot topic that we all know of, and it's going to make significant differences. But what I think with the AI play is the implications on other technologies like digital twins, like robotics, these things that we felt like we couldn't really do before, I think now are gonna come to fruition and are gonna support a bigger and broader mission around just the real estate built world ecosystem in general. Um, and then just for those, listening or watching, like, I really think just be curious, and go out there and, like, just learn about what is out there. A bit of a plug, but our team is a strategy and innovation team, and if you go to tech.realtor, we have all sorts of blogs and webinars. And actually, you guys wrote one recently for us. So there's lots of good information that's like bite size. It's not a 30-page document. It's a short blog or it's a short webinar. And so I would definitely recommend going out there and we'll kind of keep you up to date. We do one newsletter a month, so we're not spamming you. But that's a great way to kind of keep up with like what's happening in the world. We filter it for you and get it to you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, before I wrap up with our, key takeaways here, Dan, why don't you, on that note, why don't you just share with the listeners or viewers how to get in touch with you, and then maybe how to subscribe to what you just said, or how to get in touch with the program and highlights that you guys put out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big LinkedIn person. So if you just want to find me on LinkedIn, um, would be happy to connect with you. If you message me, I'll message you back pretty quickly. And then in terms of where that content is, it's tech.realtor, really easy to find. And you can follow us on LinkedIn as well. But those are probably the best places to get in touch.
Excellent. Appreciate that. From one Dan to the other. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate that. Listening to our conversation or being part of our conversation today, my key takeaways are really, I mean, I'm not in the construction space, right, per se. I'm only tangential to it. But if you're involved in building construction development, it's not an option, right? I mean, it's just like everything else in technology. It's not a fad that's going to go away. Some of these things that are really going to be, crazy innovative and time saving and money saving for the industry. So think strategically about how you want to incorporate tech. You just touched on another point that I thought is key, which is you don't have to start huge. You can start small. Solve one little problem, right? One small thing using whichever tech, be it something that comes out of the accelerator program or something else to help you create a bigger business. And last is something we touched on just a few moments ago, which is really adoption's about mindset, right? It's the if you number one thing you said is what's the blocker? It tends to be people. So to always have that curious mindset that yes, we can, let's try something new mindset. It's okay to fail, however you want to characterize it. That's not just important in construction tech, obviously important in lots of things in life and business. But given the pressure that we highlighted facing the construction and the commercial real estate industry of interest rates, supply chain issues, cost of supplies, labor constraints, all that stuff, technology has to be part of the solution, right? That's what I think I'm hearing here. So thanks again, Dan, very much for being a guest today. Really, really appreciate it. That's a wrap on today's episode of CRE with CBC Worldwide. A big thank you to Dan Weisman of the National Association of Realtors for joining us and sharing his insights on construction technology that is reshaping the way we build our built environment and the commercial real estate landscape. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow us. Our podcast, as you're probably listening now, is on Apple and Spotify or wherever you listen. So don't forget to leave us a review, follow, and like, and share it with others who you think might benefit from our conversation. It's super helpful as we develop our listener base out there and we share knowledge of what's going on in the commercial real estate industry. Otherwise, for more resources, you can come to our website, which is www.cbcworldwide.com. That's cbcworldwide.com. Check out other podcast archives and listen again on your favorite podcast platform. I'm Dan Spiegel. I really appreciate you listening. Dan Weisman, again, thank you for joining us today. And tune in to another CRE with CBC Worldwide podcast soon.